Before she passed, my great aunt used to have a motto: there's the easy way, and then there's the quick way. She explained that the easy paths often took a long time to navigate, partially because of all the traffic. But to get certain things done with timeliness, one often had to shove up their sleeves and be prepared to labor. I wish I would have listened more, especially when it came to picking my schedule that day. I could have taken an earlier shift. I should have. But nope, I wanted an easy day. And subsequently, I may need a therapy session now. I wasn't even supposed to be working that day. It was a Monday and the first day of my scheduled vacation week, though I didn't have any plans except to relax and do some light cleaning. Emphasis on light. My manager called me the Saturday before, asking if I was willing to swap days with a coworker, one who had just suffered a major disaster in their home and needed emergency time off. The rest of the department was doing what they could to help out, and I wanted to be a team player. I agreed to give up a few hours in exchange for time and a half pay. That was in addition to my vacation check, and that sounded better than actually going to the gym anyway. Since I had a bit of seniority, I was able to choose which of the three shifts I wanted to work. I chose the least busy, which was also the latest option. I didn't have to be to work until 4 o'clock. That meant I still had most of my day to enjoy. And even though I was slated to stay until 10, things were always so dead by then, I knew I'd be able to cut out early. Everything was going to plan. My day was extremely boring, in a good way, and I even was able to leave well before 9 p.m. I was still looking at 6 consecutive days off, and I was in a better mood than when I left work Friday. On a whim, I splurged and bought myself a burger from a fancy steakhouse near my job. I'd only eaten there once before, when one of the big bosses treated the staff, but everything was working out so beautifully, I wanted to celebrate. What I failed to do, however, was to check the train schedule. I was standing on the platform by about 9:15, but the next train home was still nearly an hour away. That's when I thought about what Aunt Sarah used to say. This was me taking the easy path, the long, easy path. But I wasn't about to let the wait dampen my mood. I sat on the bench and started eating. I was alone for about 15 minutes. Then a man wandered up the steps and onto the platform. He smiled and spoke. I did the same. He then sat within conversation range and started small talk. He said I could call him Drift. I offered him some fries. He accepted and probably ended up eating more of them than I did. Then about 10 minutes before the train was due, he asked if he could tell me a story. I really wasn't in the mood, but I was trapped. I'm not a mean person, but this was just starting to seem like his ploy to butter me up so he could ask me for money afterwards. Though, I wish it were that simple. I agreed to listen, and Drift began. His story started with a young woman attending a college party. It was her freshman year and she didn't know anyone else on campus. Eager to make friends, she joined several clubs and organizations, and it didn't take long for her to begin to have a consistent social circle. But Drift expressed that the woman had also made enemies for herself in that short time, not by her own doing, but simply because that's the way jealousy worked. The woman's drink was spiked at the party. Within days, she began experiencing awful head and body aches and ended up suffering a mild stroke. She spent 4 days in the hospital, and it took her weeks to be able to walk on her own strength again. Her father was beyond upset when he heard the news, and knowing people in important places, he started his own investigation. In no time, the father had all the answers he was looking for. He had the names and personal information of the three people responsible for his daughter's pain, and so began his revenge planning. The first target was his easiest. The guy wasn't a student at the school and didn't have a strong relationship with his family. He was only taking advantage of one of the students at the school and using her apartment as a place to sell drugs out of. Drift said his missing body was found by police a short time after in the river during an unrelated investigation. There were still no leads in the case. Drift explained target number 2 was a bit more difficult, not physically, but emotionally. The young woman's father had met and interacted with target number 2 on several occasions. She'd been over to his house not long before and had given his daughter several rides back and forth to class. The father had taken a liking to his daughter's new acquaintance. However, it seemed he had judged the girl in error, and even though it pained the father, target number 2 had to be dealt with as well. That said, the father couldn't bring himself to dispose of her body in the same manner as he'd done the first. He had eaten meals with this young lady, and had listened to his daughter share joy-filled stories regarding her. So, overcome by a rising self-induced grief, as the father stood over the young lady's motionless body, he called the authorities and turned himself in. Drift got quiet. I looked up at the station clock. The train was due in another minute or two. I asked if that's how his story ended. Oddly enough, Drift said, yeah. He wasn't the worst storyteller I ever heard, but I thought his endings really needed work. I stood up and looked down the platform. I could see the train's lights approaching a short distance away. I grabbed my work bag and tossed it over my shoulder. But there was just one more question I had to ask Drift. Do you know whatever happened to the third responsible party? Drift stood up and looked me square in the eyes before he spoke. Nothing yet. Drift shoved up his sleeves to his jacket. On either of his wrists was a broken half of a pair of handcuffs. Drift thanked me for my generosity and conversation. Then I watched him disappear back down the stairway as my train pulled into the station. That wasn't a bad ending after all, but I'm seriously hoping it's just a story.